Welcome to PodBiz, the money behind the mic, where we get into the business of podcasting. I'm Norma Jean Belenke, a podcast and media strategist.
And I'm John Kiernan. I'm a podcast producer, and we're asking the question that's on everyone's mind. Where is the money in podcasting?
Each week, we talk with podcast industry professionals, marketers, and creators who are turning podcasts into a thriving business and making the industry what it is today.
With real revenue, real strategies, and real results.
If you're looking to grow or scale your show, and of course monetize, you're in the right place.
So let's get down to PodBiz.
Today we're speaking with Millie Boats, VP of Product at Acast. We'll be speaking about creator and advertiser marketplaces for monetization, how creators can increase their monetization with footprints outside of traditional RSS downloads, and what you don't know about working on the product side of podcasting. Let's get down to PodBiz. Hi Millie, how's it going?
Hi, I'm well, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Well, let's jump straight into it. Where's the money in podcasting?
I should have known that would be a first question, considering the kind of intro you just gave. I would say that for a lot of what we would have considered early days is that the money in podcasting is advertising. And I think that is very much still true. I know that the business kind of flirted with a subscriptions model and sort of deliberated amongst ourselves around how big of a business that would be for creators. But I think really what stood the test of time is that a lot of money in podcasting is in advertising, and it still is. And that's why we're seeing huge growth in the ad dollars that are flowing into podcasting. But I think what's really interesting that has changed in the last couple of years is, whereas we would have said advertising on podcasting means kind of RSS-based dynamic ad insertions of pre-recorded ads or host read ads that are delivered into environments that allow for RSS, so audio-based advertising. I think that is where we're seeing a lot of change now. So when we say the money in podcasting, I think it's still very much in podcast advertising. But what is a podcast is now so much more expansive than it used to be in terms of audio, video, that video being in social, that video being in YouTube, that audio being in YouTube with graphics, etc., live podcasting events. So whilst it's still advertising in podcasting can mean so much more. And I think that's where the money is now.
Yeah, absolutely. There have been so many, panels, discussions, sessions at conferences, dialogue, virtual events, and even podcast episodes, of course, on how do we define what a podcast is anymore, right? Obviously, it's the RSS feed, but as YouTube enters the space, it's really changing that conversation.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that kind of where we've come to at Acast is a little bit, we have our own definition. Remarkably, a podcast is what is considered a podcast at that point in time and culture. And I think very much now, I think that it sounds profitable or did a long audio series, or someone else, maybe this is one that I can be fact checked, as all the cool podcasters say, on kind of what is an audio podcast, what is a podcast, sorry. But primarily for me, it's kind of what is a podcast is considered to be whatever people are labeling podcasts, and there being enough convergence around that topic at any one point in time. And I think very much now, it's easier to define what seems not to be a podcast than it is to what is a podcast. But I as an avid podcast consumer, I both listen to my favorite podcasts like Giggly Squad. I also watch Giggly Squad on YouTube. I watch kind of tangential to their podcast, their kind of new web series about kind of what they did on tour. I also try and get tickets to their live tour, and I follow them on Instagram. So arguably all of those things are part of their podcast ecosystem. But I wouldn't consider it that just kind of their audio RSS feed is their podcast. I think I engage with that podcast in many different formats.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you're saying is how podcasting now is really more about the wider creator brand. And you mentioned that Acast has their own definition of podcast. So can you tell us what that is?
I could, and then it would probably be extinct within kind of 6 months. So I think broadly we're led by what is considered a podcast in the culture. And I think that very much there's an audio RSS component to it still. And that's a huge part of podcasting. And some podcasts will never lend themselves to anything other than that original format. But I think we are definitely seeing that the majority of creators are now creating their podcast with video in mind. For instance, we're on a video podcast now and very much have extensions of that. So I think that we all know the kind of thematic things that we typically identify with podcasts. So they're more conversational conversational in tone. Some people like the definition that they don't need your eyes to kind of watch it. You can just listen to it. But I think at this point in time, any definition I was giving would be extinct within 6 months.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think when I work with my clients, it's really about creating that brand, right? And the podcast and the RSS feed obviously is such a big part of that in terms of what you want to say and the long format of your show. But in terms of, the overall footprint as a creator, it is quite wide and it is changing a bit. So how does that factor into your role in product at Acast?
Yeah, so I think that essentially product really is around kind of, are we building the right thing?
Yeah.
And the right thing should be defined by the thing that our customers want and need. And so knowing what our customers care about and our creators and our advertisers care about is so much part of whether or not I think that as a product organization, we're running a successful organization delivering value by building solutions that meet those needs. And so I think when we talk about that changing definition and how that's kind of informed our product approach, it's very much, okay, if we know that video and the type of format that podcasts are now being live in, how does that expand our advertising opportunities to offer creators? So it's kind of chicken and egg in terms of, do we start with the advertisers' needs of, okay, well, we know that a creator's brand, to your point, and their audience can be found in all of these different locations. How can we construct more omni-channel campaigns to offer the audience that is available in these different locations rather than just the ones that are available on a podcast listening app? Or do we start with the creator and kind of how do we engage them in terms of their monetization opportunities? And I think for us being a two-sided marketplace where we connect advertisers to creators, it really allows us to kind of tackle both sides of that user need and that emerging industry that is coming from creators being so present with their podcasting content in multi-format areas.
Yeah, absolutely. And what have you seen in terms of trends, both, from creators, because obviously, what you've said is really within that spirit of service, which has been a very big theme on PodViz, right? So it's one of those things where, if you're a podcaster, you have to think about your audience. If you're a hosting company, you have to think about your podcasters. If you're an advertiser, you have to think about your consumers. And so it's really within that spirit of service. But, when you're talking about seeing those priorities shift, what kind of shifts are you guys seeing, and what have been some trends you guys have seen maybe in the last 18 months?
So I think the trends that we're seeing are that kind of adoption of video podcasting and also how they are monetizing so we know from proprietary research that we've just conducted that it's, for a lot of podcasters, it is their primary source of income, and also that social media is one of their biggest sources of sponsorship, like how they are delivering on their sponsorship opportunities. And so I think that is definitely a trend that has accelerated in the last 18 months. And so that really informs like how we are able to adapt our products to meet that kind of trend. So for instance, one of our big products that we went out to market with a couple of years ago was called Ad Collab. And it basically is something where an advertiser can directly interact with a creator on our platform in a way in which allows them to much more quickly facilitate a host-read sponsorship. And now we're adapting that into how do they facilitate a sponsorship that can also be living on Instagram and can also be baked into a YouTube episode. So that trend into video isn't just a trend into kind of like what the creator wants to produce, but also the trend in what kind of advertising formats are then open to them and what kind of monetization expectations do they have.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I think, one other trend I wanted to note was I think we're really seeing empowerment of a different type of creator as well. So you've obviously got those huge media brands, call Alex Cooper, call her daddy, that is, they're media empires in of themselves. And I think that that's one of the biggest trends that we're seeing is kind of almost like outgrowing their original podcast is their media empire and then franchising that out. We see that with Stephen Bartlett and what he's doing now with Flight Story, etc. I think that is one trend. I also think we have an inverse trend of smaller creators feeling really, really empowered because they are able to reach their niche audience on many different platforms. And I think that what we are seeing is kind of those mid-tier creators or those smaller tier creators really punching above their weight in terms of engagement of their audience, and then how we can leverage that with the different kind of metrics, not just downloads, which is very much, the old RSS paradigm, but how we can leverage the smaller creators and that sense of empowerment to facilitate broader monetization opportunities for them as well, because they are able to prove their engagement across audiences in many different formats, across many different channels.
Yeah, and we've seen a lot of people talk about the death of the download. So in terms of metrics, what have you seen both creators and advertisers looking at in addition to downloads? That's number one. And then also in terms of some of that proprietary research that you guys have done, is there anything else you can tell us, or is there anywhere we can view it, or at least kind of a snippet or a snapshot of what you guys are looking at from your creator base?
Yeah, so I can probably go into the first on the downloads. So I think that downloads, I think we're seeing things pop up, like obviously Spotify plays and other metrics that consumption platforms are releasing. I think we're not going to see downloads die until the whole industry would be able to work off the same metrics. And of course, these platforms are incentivized to guard that close to their chest, so that can be kind of the reason to buy through that channel, or the reason the creators get more additional insights by using those CMSs, etc. So I think, we're an open podcasting started as an open ecosystem. I think for us to truly move beyond downloads, we can't move to a metric that is not available for the entire industry to access. So that's kind of my position on downloads. But of course, we are innovating in terms of like how we understand performance for our advertisers and performance for our creators, so that we are not kind of left behind with the download metric only. And then on the second piece of creator research, so it's unpublished as of yet. I was giving a little sneak peek before, but it's very much around, because I think we've been talking about the wider definition of podcasting, as we were saying at the start. I think there's been a lot of research into that in terms of like the number of creators that are doing simulcast and short clips on Instagram, etc. Yeah. I think that what this research focuses on is more how that has driven creator monetization expectations, and what are still the friction points in the monetization options creators have, and how much do they think the current solutions out in market are kind of working for them. And that's really the space that we play in, is being the best at creator monetization and giving them a really comprehensive access to those tools, even if they're not the largest shows. So that's why we've kind of led on that research, and I can give more details about when it'll be published once I follow up with the team.
Stay tuned, everyone. Thanks for joining us here on Podbiz. If you're liking the show, please subscribe and write us a review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps other podcast pros find the show. Thanks so much. And back to Podbiz. Well, Millie, how did you get into podcasting?
It's a bit of a accidental story, which I'm sure my old boss won't mind me telling. So when I was 25, during the lockdown pandemic, which means that people can age me from that little snippet, but I started a podcast as a bit of just like a fun activity, just to see how easy it would be. And I used Spotify's Anchor product, which is what it was called at the time. I just recorded it on my phone. It was very much a MVP style podcast, and I mostly interviewed my friends. So it was also an MVP style guest experience as well. But then when I was looking to leave my last company, where I was also in product there, I noticed the Acast job, and I was in touch with the director of product at the time. And I thought that I had made my podcast through Acast, because in my head I had got confused between Anchor and Acast. And so when I applied for the job, I did mention this in my interview, and I said, I'm so passionate about your product. I'm really, I'm a user, like all of this, really playing it up. And it was only afterwards that when I was going into my app that I realized that I had completely kind of misunderstood that I had made my podcast with Anchor. And then I very quickly redirected my feed to Acast. And then I was like, let's really hope that that my old boss didn't fact check me. Exactly. I migrated because you guys are so much better. Like, it was a funny story. But yeah, and then I think it came, it was very much not that I knew much about the business side of Acast, but I really loved podcasting as a consumer. And that's why I think I was absolutely thrilled when the opportunity came up, and why I've stuck around the last 3.5 years.
Yeah, it's interesting. Sometimes, we have side projects or we have creative projects. And then, as someone who has, a background in media, it's one of those things. That's how I got into podcasting as well. I had a podcast, just way back in the day about something totally different. And then, because I have a media background, I knew a little bit about the industry. And so I was able to apply that. It's definitely one of those things where it's very serendipitous when those kind of things happen.
Yeah, but serendipitous of how they happen, but then so advantageous when they do, because I think at least for me, nothing makes my day better than a great podcast episode. I think I listened to just a fantastic miniseries that the New York Times did called The Protocol last night on the plane. I binged it, and I genuinely find podcasts so fascinating. And then when we're creating products at Acast where, a huge amount of our creators are living off their income from podcast advertising, it just incentivizes me so differently, being like, this is the kind of content that I want more creators to actually make. And if I can give them a way to make it because they can live off their craft, that's incredible. So I worked in health tech before and I didn't feel this motivated, even though that was arguably saving lives. So I do think
lives. Who cares?
Yeah.
There's podcasts out there.
Exactly. We'll tell the story once the life has been saved.
Well, it's interesting,
So, yeah.
I think, to be able to kind of follow your passion in that way as well. And, you've said a couple of times that Acast, really has a large percentage of creators that are living off their podcasts. Do you have like a percentage or, a rough number of podcasters that you guys have seen really make a distinct income from their podcast or even just their overall content footprint?
So we have 144,000 shows, I think is our latest reported metric. And obviously it's not, and 44,000 of those are making serious amounts of money. I don't know the figure off the top of my head of the percentage that would, and also it would be survey data as well, so it would be extrapolated. But we have a good number, a good significant portion of those that are making significant amounts or being paid out, which means that they're making kind of above 50x dollars. So that we pay them out within our marketplace, that are in what we call the Acast marketplace, which is that productized journey that allows creators to be matched with advertisers. And I think, it's one of our core missions is that the maximum number of that 144,000 can actually make money, because what you see, especially with the fact that the often the highest kind of advertising opportunity that a creator has is for a host read, which is for anyone that listens to this podcast. I'm assuming maybe the target audience is going to know about podcasting, but it's the host.
Yeah.
Okay, when the host is reading the advert, that is because it's such a laborious process and because you need to be made aware and you're in kind of a collaboration with the advertiser, it lends itself to being a more exclusive advertising type of deal. And so that means that only typically in the past, many of our only top tier creators would get those kind of opportunities because it's the ones where our sales and planners would know about that creator because of their size. And that creator is also kind of got the download metrics that are attractive to the advertiser, etc. And one of our core missions within our product is enabling and empowering those smaller and mid-tier creators to also be available for those opportunities for host read ads. And that's because we've invested so heavily into things like AdCollab, which is our scaled kind of collaboration workflow for advertisers and creators, and also with our most recent product launch, which is Smart Recommendations, which is our AI-powered search engine, which allows advertisers to see the most relevant podcasts for their audience goals. And it doesn't kind of only take in audience size and listens as the metric there. It's a really advanced kind of retrieval augmented search that kind of goes into the content of the episode, what we know about those creators' audiences, what we know about those creators to determine the right match. And that is all in service of getting a far bigger majority of that 144,000 to the point where they can extract like enough revenue to make it their income, or at least a profitable kind of side hustle.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what would you say was one key move or metric or even a mindset that's made the biggest impact? I mean, maybe not with your career because we spoke about that, but with, the creators that you guys work with at Acast.
I think a mindset that has influenced the creators we work with. I think that, I suppose, actually, I could answer this in two ways. I'll answer in two ways. So for us in product, I think one of the metrics, cheated on the question. One of the metrics we care loads about is the number of creators receiving a sponsorship, just for the point that I just mentioned of it's traditionally been this kind of gated community of very big podcasters that have made available for those. And we really want to democratize access to it. And that is a huge product challenge when you think of how complex that back and forth of getting matched with an advertiser and then developing an effective ad campaign can be. But that relates to the second mindset that I think a lot of our creators adopt, which is you will not get anywhere if you are just taking an advertising for money's sake and you don't care about authenticity or your audience. So I really would say that that second kind of ethos a lot of our creators adopt is how to grow their podcast, grow their revenue, but do it in a way that is authentic to them and their audience. And I think that that pertains to one of our other product investments, which is the smart recommendations that I talked about, which is how do we effectively matchmake the advertiser to the creator in a way where we're taking into account the creator's brand affinity, we're taking into account the creator's audience, we're not matchmaking kind of a McDonald's with a vegan podcast. And,
Right.
you know, we're not going to we're not going to suggest things which don't make sense. And I think that that is another one of the big kind of ethoses that we really carry with us, is the fact that our creators want to create long-lasting relationships with their audiences whilst making money. And we need to be able to facilitate both.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what's something people don't know about what you do?
Probably a lot, because I I think it's sometimes the more senior you get, the more you're working in Slack and less in terms of kind of, you know, you're not the one that's showcasing the product yourself if you're kind of overseeing everything. But
yeah,
I think, that's a really good question. What people don't know we do, or I do. I would say that, it's a really, I'm really flummoxed. I'm trying to think of, because I'm thinking of all the things where the majority of what I do, I can't imagine most people will know. But I suppose I would say that a huge amount of my time is spent on kind of people. So I think that when you get to be more senior in product, you need to have a good intuition about whether a product direction or a project or a build is going in the right place or the wrong place, but you are often not the one making product decisions. So if you do get more senior in product, you need to be comfortable that the role itself is far less about building and is far more kind of like a recruitment agency and people management.
Yeah, you're captain of the ship, right? You're steering it to kind of get the product to where you want it to go versus actually making the product yourself on the front lines.
Exactly. And it is a totally different type of job. And I don't think everyone enjoys losing that hands-on side of themselves, because I'll often have a lot of opinions that I will just hold back because I know that I haven't been in the depths with the team to have as an informed position than the product manager. So I really need to focus on coaching the product manager so that I can trust that they are informed enough to make those decisions. And I think that a lot of people might assume that a VP of product, and in some companies, I think it definitely probably is still this. But for Acast, we have very autonomous teams and we have very autonomous PMs, that a lot of my job, I think, would kind of reflect more general management than like hands-on product work. But I think that maybe that's true of every senior role, but I think it's
an interesting switch, right? When you go from doing the work on the front lines to managing the work to then managing the direction of the managers doing the work, definitely, to kind of run that whole department and see the overall goals of the company and the data coming in and how you can kind of steer, instead of like a small sailboat, like a bigger cargo ship. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I also think that I think you really have to have that kind of, I always think that it feels like you're not moving fast enough all the time until you step back and look at the last year and you realize how much the industry has changed, how much your understanding of the customer has changed, how much your product suite looks different in its kind of component setup than the product suite. Like, maybe it looks far more like a platform this year than it did last year when it was in more component parts, or like maybe our infrastructure on the ad delivery side, or, maybe we've built more infrastructure in one area now such that like there's parity with our ad tech infrastructure. I think that those are the sorts of things where, you operate at two landscapes all of the time. And maybe what is still common that is not in other general management roles that comes with being a VP of product that people might not see is this just constant existential dread that you're not running fast enough. So maybe that should have been my answer. What people don't know is that I have constant existential dread that we are not running fast enough. But I also have so much trust in my teams that I know we're building the right thing, and that so much of what you see on LinkedIn from others is smoke and mirrors.
Yeah, it's interesting, that LinkedIn smokescreen, right, of celebration and experience and facts and know-how. It's very interesting to see, what's actually going on with different companies and with different creators. Well, Millie, if you had to start over today, what would you do differently to grow faster or smarter?
At Acast or in my career?
Both.
Oh, it's good. Okay, if I had to start over, I think I would have left my first job faster. So I was a strategy consultant and I stayed there 3.5 years, close to 4 years. And I think I should have left after 2. And then I took the kind of jump into the startup world. And I think I had a really great training experience at Monitor Deloitte. I'm not a huge fan of consultants generally. And I think that just comes from, I think that the incentive structure doesn't lend itself towards the buy-in that I really enjoy from a lot of our kind of, working with people that are fully bought in and committed to a company. But I do think that they train analysts in such a good way. So I think it's like a fantastic investment for your career to start as a strategy consultant. But I think, beyond 2 years, I wish I just got my hands stuck in straight away into industry. So that's one of them. And then I think if my learning from how we would go faster at Acast, if I was doing it again, I would probably say there is the temptation in product to run builds in parallel. So have, here's our priority goal, but we also care about this goal. And I think over the last 2 years, I've really seen that is not a clear enough message to give to teams in a way that is going to you feel like you might be building and making progress on 2 product areas at the same time. And I actually think that you end up doing such a mediocre job on both that neither achieve the goal. So I think what I have tried to put in practice this year a little bit more with our teams is more explicit single goal focus for teams. Which is hard because at Acast, we both build for our internal sellers and our internal partner managers for the creators, but we also build directly for advertisers and for creators themselves. So it's not, prioritization's not a fun job, but building great products is a fun job, and one entails the other.
Absolutely. Well, Millie, we always ask one last question. What are you most excited about coming up within the podcasting industry?
Great question. I am most excited about more creators realizing their power through tapping into an engaged audience, even if it's not a massive audience, because I think it's that flywheel of if you are able to get monetization opportunities early, you are able to grow your show because you have more incentive to do so, you have more passion, you have more financial freedom.
Yeah.
But it is still considered quite inaccessible for a lot of people to make enough money to have that financial freedom. And that's where I think our tools need to become so much better and the products we put in their hands to be so much better. And I think that definitely what we're seeing with the ad revenue flow or ad dollars flowing into podcasting specifically, last year being the year of the podcast, especially in elections, the time is nigh for the creator to get what they deserve in podcasting. And I'm super excited to be building at the frontier of accessible products that can allow for more creators to make more money with us.
Absolutely. Well, Millie Boats, VP of Product at Acast, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.